Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who have learned they can only rely on themselves. At first, that kind of strength looks admirable. The person who never asks for help. The one who handles everything alone. The one others describe as independent, reliable, even unbreakable. But there's a quiet question hidden inside this behavior. Why do some people never ask for help, even when they clearly need it? For many people, asking for help is uncomfortable but possible. For others, it feels almost impossible, not inconvenient, not awkward, impossible. And the reason usually has very little to do with pride. The real reason often begins much earlier, because there is a moment in life when someone learns a very specific lesson, a lesson about what happens when they need someone. Most people never notice when this lesson is formed, but once it is learned, it quietly shapes an entire identity, an identity built around one idea. I can only depend on myself. At first, this belief does not look unhealthy. In fact, it often looks like maturity. You may have met people like this. They solve their own problems. They rarely complain. They rarely burden others with their struggles. When something goes wrong, they handle it quietly. From the outside, it can look like confidence, but inside, something very different is happening, because the person is not simply choosing independence. They are protecting themselves from something they learned long ago. For many people, the earliest experiences with vulnerability were not safe. A child asks for help. Maybe they are ignored. Maybe they are dismissed. Maybe they are told they are overreacting. Sometimes they are even shamed for needing support. You should handle that yourself. Stop being so sensitive. You're strong. You don't need help. Over time, something important begins to shift. The child stops asking, not because they no longer need support, but because they no longer believe support will come. And this is the moment the pattern quietly begins. When needing someone feels uncertain, the mind creates a different strategy. Self-reliance. Extreme self-reliance. At first, this adaptation is protective. If no one helps you, learning to handle things alone becomes a survival skill. The person becomes resourceful, independent, emotionally contained, and the world often rewards this. Teachers praise the responsible child. Friends admire the dependable one. Co-workers trust the person who never struggles. But underneath this strength is a hidden rule. Do not rely on anyone, because relying on people leads to disappointment, or embarrassment, or loss of control. And slowly, this rule becomes part of the person's identity. This is the part most people misunderstand. The person who never asks for help usually does not think of themselves as avoiding support. They simply believe this is who they are. I am independent. I handle my own problems. I don't like bothering people. But if you look closely, something deeper is happening. Because asking for help does not just feel inconvenient. It feels unsafe. Unsafe emotionally. Unsafe psychologically. When someone built their identity around self-reliance, asking for help creates a strange internal conflict. Because needing someone threatens the very story they tell about themselves. The story that says, I am the one who handles things. I am the one who stays strong. I am the one who doesn't need anyone. And when that identity is challenged, the discomfort can be intense. Even small moments can trigger it. A friend offers support. A partner notices they are overwhelmed. A co-worker suggests sharing a workload. To most people, these moments feel normal. But to someone built around self-reliance, they can feel exposing, because accepting help requires admitting something, that they cannot carry everything alone. And that realization touches an old fear, the fear of being seen as weak, or incapable, or dependent. But there's another layer to this pattern that most people never see: control. When you rely only on yourself, you control the outcome. You control the effort. You control the expectations. But the moment you rely on someone else, control becomes uncertain. What if they let you down? What if they misunderstand? What if they fail you in the exact way someone once did before? So the mind chooses a safer option. Do everything alone. It is predictable. It is controlled. And most importantly, it avoids disappointment. But over time, something else begins to happen. Something quieter. Isolation. Not dramatic isolation. Not obvious loneliness. Just a slow narrowing of emotional space. Because support is one of the ways humans experience connection. When people help each other, something important is exchanged. Trust, vulnerability, care. But when someone never asks for help, they unintentionally close the door to that exchange. Others may still care about them. Others may still offer support. But the person rarely lets that support fully land. They smile. They say they're fine. They handle it themselves. And slowly, the people around them begin to assume something, that this person does not need anyone. This is where the pattern becomes visible. The very strength that once protected them now creates distance. Friends stop offering help. Partners feel shut out. Co-workers assume everything is under control. And the person who built their identity on self-reliance begins carrying more and more alone. Not because no one cares, but because they never learn how to let people in. Here the pattern quietly deepens. Because the longer someone lives this way, the harder it becomes to change. The identity becomes stronger. I've always handled things myself. I'm just not the type to ask for help. But identities are powerful things. Once we believe something about ourselves, we protect that belief, even when it costs us, even when it isolates us, even when it exhausts us. And yet, something interesting often happens later in life. Many people who live for years in extreme independence eventually reach a moment of realization, not a dramatic breakdown, just a quiet awareness. They notice how heavy everything feels, how much responsibility they carry, how rarely they allow themselves to lean on others. And sometimes they ask a surprising question. What if strength was never meant to mean doing everything alone? Because real strength is not just endurance. It is also trust. Trust that others can show up. Trust that vulnerability will not always lead to disappointment. Trust that connection requires mutual support. But learning this can feel uncomfortable at first, because asking for help after years of self-reliance feels unnatural. Almost like speaking a language you never learned. The first attempts can feel awkward, even vulnerable. But something important happens in those moments. The old belief begins to loosen. The belief that needing people is weakness. The belief that support is unreliable. The belief that independence must be absolute. And slowly, a new understanding begins to form. Self-reliance is valuable, but it was never meant to replace connection. Humans are not designed to carry life entirely alone. Even the strongest people need support sometimes, not because they're incapable, but because they are human. And often, the people who struggle most to ask for help are the ones who needed support the earliest, the ones who learned too soon that vulnerability could be risky. But that lesson does not have to remain permanent, because identity is not fixed. The person who once survived through independence can still learn something new, that allowing others to help does not erase strength. It expands it. And sometimes the most powerful shift in a person's life happens in a simple moment. The moment they finally say, I could use some help. Not as a failure, not as weakness, but as trust. So here's a question worth reflecting on. When someone never asks for help, are they truly strong? Or are they protecting a part of themselves that once learned it was safer to stand alone? And at what moment in a person's life do you think that belief first begins? Subscribe for emotional clarity.